My name's Alan Steinfeld, and I've written this book, which is not just my book. This is a collection of writings, including a key chapter by Doctors J.J. and Desiree Hurtak. And it is about, exactly, Susan, the field preceding us. There's a field in the cosmos that wants us to wake up to who we really are. I mean, Jackie knows we are these great beings, and no one has told us how infinite we are. We've been dumbed down by religion, not to offend anyone. Politics,
and politics, of course.
Politics, not to offend anyone else. But we are so infinite, and education has dumbed us, and media especially. You know, I mean, the media will give us a little bit, and not everything. We are so infinite that we are not separate from the great beings that are out there. We just have to figure out how to use this consciousness that psychics and mediums and healers have already tapped into. And this is the moment in history we are at when the planet is waking up. Imagine looking back, a couple of hundred years saying, what was it like when a planet woke up to their real potential? This is really what this whole movement towards extraterrestrial. Susan's right. It's not about what's out there. It's about what's in here. And how do we access this non-local qualities? By just supporting each other in a greater community. I wrote this book called A Preparation for the New Realities of Extraterrestrial Existence. So the last 2 years, we've been prepared for things that are not normal, right? I think that's part of the whole quarantine, COVID, whatever it is. We've been sucked into another timeline. We have been, hey, Kamara. Yes, we've been pulled into another parallel timeline that has taken us out of the normalcy of possibilities, and we are in uncharted territories. So that's why I love talking with JJ and Desiree Hurtak, because they have forged a new path in consciousness for the last 40 years. They haven't been afraid to come out, yes, with new possibilities, and we are part of a greater cosmology. So we just need that, and this is a great community Susan has created, to open our minds to the unlimited. I teach remote viewing sometimes, which means you can project your consciousness anywhere you want. But that consciousness is also being projected here. That's why people are getting these downloads, these incredible art, like my friend over there coming through, Kamara Jones. Incredible multi-dimensional overlays that when you look at this, all this information is coming to you, but we're limited by our education, or what Terence McKenna says, culture is not your friend. It'll make you think this is a table and that's a floor, and it is that, but there's so much more. So art, creativity, accessing these higher dimensional frequencies, this is what making contact is about. Making contact. It's not just about the ETs, it's making contact with ourselves, with the planet, with the rest of the cosmos, with our future, with all levels of possibility. And that's unknown. So just want to bring JJ and Desiree into the conversation, because if you don't know Dr. Hertog's experience, in 1973, he had, I would say, a paranormal super consciousness happening where he was taken off the planet, in a good way. Taken off the planet and met these higher dimensional beings. You want to talk about that a little bit, Dr. Hertog?
Thank you for the introduction. I was trained as a social scientist. I have worked behind the scenes with some of the top people in the space industry, including 3 astronauts. In 1973, as a young professor, I was working with the teaching of Oriental text and also Near Eastern text called the Dead Sea Scrolls. To cut to the chase, most of the ancient literature speaks of beings of light. We would call them angelic forms of intelligence. I felt that I could not teach this material unless I myself had some type of experience. Mm-hmm. And so I began to pray and to meditate more deeply with the sacred language in the ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek, and Coptic. And as a result of what I will call deep breathing, some would call hyperventilation, I experienced seeing the being of light that instructed me with scientific information of the future, information that has now come to pass in this book called The Keys of Enoch, which is the consciousness cosmology of how the human race is connected with a much larger family of intelligence, at the top end of which is the ultra-terrestrial intelligence, at the bottom end is the human and the extraterrestrial intelligence.
So there's many levels of being, of awareness, and this is the densest. This is like, one channel on the radio, and now we have Wi-Fi and cable, and so there's so many more frequencies to tune into is what you talk about.
Well, I just want to also mention about Alan's book, and it's a great book because it starts with a very practical person, which is Nick Pope, who worked for the Ministry of Defense in the UK, and so he's very much into the nuts and bolts. What have they seen? Where's the reports? And one of the reasons this is getting so much play right now is, some of you might not know, but when the COVID bill was passed in January, Marco Rubio, who's from Florida, one of the senators, put a small little clause in there that his Senate Intelligence Committee would have access to all the FBI, CIA, NSA, all the agencies.
The intelligence
agencies' top secret information. So he got it for themselves. And then, of course, it said they would then filter this, or they didn't say filter, but they'll filter it, and bring it to the public. And the deadline was 6 months. And so that deadline is now coming up, which is June 24th. So that's why everyone from even ESPN, which is the sports station for those of you who don't watch it, are starting to talk about the fact of what will be released. And all of us and many of the people at the local Laughlin conference did not feel a lot was going to be released. But what is interesting is Dr. Hurtak said 2004 would be a turning point for consciousness. And
that was said in 1973.
And nothing really happened at that point that made the headlines. But it seems that if they release information now, they will only temporarily, I would say, go back to 2004 to the Nimitz experience, which was off the coast of San Diego, where the Navy actually spotted technically for 3 days, but one focused event, extraterrestrial contact.
And that got the ball rolling. The Nimitz released video that came out in the New York Times, December 16th, 2017, reported and showed that video of the Navy pilots from the Nimitz tracking this thing.
Called a Tic Tac.
Looks like a big little tank, a little, what are those, propane tanks flying. It was big, no propulsion sights. No, there was no way weren't even any windows. It could have been some sort of drone, but not from anything that we know on this planet.
Because of how fast it moved all the time.
And that's what came out recently, again in the New York Times. There's a headline that says, this is not alien technology, but we can't rule out that it is alien technology. They say two things in 3 paragraphs right in the New York Times, June 3rd, 2021. We don't think it's alien technology. And so the government, and this is why I did write, doesn't know how to explain this. They don't know what's going on there.
In the language of political science, this is called doublespeak.
Right. And they do that on purpose because I think they want to plant a seed. And I almost disagree with you. I think we might get something. More, they might say, and this would be what Linda Moulton Howe in the book calls the mind-cracking headline, we are not alone in the universe.
Well, that they would say.
No, they're not saying that yet.
Okay, no. But it's June 24th.
They might say, I don't know, if they say June 24th, which is just a few days from now, and we'll talk to UFO Joe, who tracks this whole thing, and he's so good. He was in Laughlin. That would be a breakthrough for everything. Just imagine if we were told, and it's obvious that we're not, but if we were told officially what it would do to sociology, technology, psychology. It would change the fundamental way we think about reality. And I think that is why the government is having such a hard time with saying, Yes, there's aliens. You know?
Well, let me go on because, okay, so that's really just kind of the first few chapters of the book.
Right.
And then we introduce both the technology, do they get here through wormholes? Do they have to, fly normally through space? And also the consciousness. And I think that's what a lot of the people here in Mystic Dream Bookshop is interested in. And this is something also we and Grant Cameron, who's another author in the book, said that, once you've even seen a UFO, you don't even have to have the alien come down and shake your hand or something like that. But once you do that, you're entangled. This is a quantum physics term that says that there's a connection just by your sight and your recognition. I mean, maybe a sight, if you don't recognize it, won't work, but your recognition, hey, this is something from out of this world. And this can appear also if you see beings in your rooms at night, anything like that. You get this entangled connection, and therefore your consciousness is inevitably and maybe even eternally linked to that reality.
And changed in a way. When the Phoenix Lights appeared over the whole city of Phoenix in 1997, this doctor, Lynn Katai, saw these lights, and she gave up her practice and investigated. 20 years she went into this study about what are these, who are they, because it's so shocking for most people, not for us. But
although I always say, don't quit your day job, right?
Well, I've done that though. I quit my day job to do. How many people here have seen something unusual, like
either at night in your room or even
something? Well, you are entangled. Grant Cameron says you are part of this, what he calls the greatest event that happened in human history. He calls it the Super Bowl of all events. So really, we have to prepare ourselves just by opening our minds. This is like the essence of what I'm trying to say there. And there's many levels. I start with Nick Pope, who says, no, the government doesn't want to tell you because of this reason and that reason. But, I don't believe everyone who's written a chapter in this book. I put it all out there because there's...
You believe everyone, but you don't necessarily believe
I don't
why the government
agree with everyone because no one has the whole story here. That's why there's 11 different people in this book, because each one has a piece of the elephant, but they haven't put it together to make the elephant, They all have their piece and everyone thinks they're sort of on the right track, and many of them are, but what if all the pieces have not been laid out? What if we're told about time warps and, higher dimensions of consciousness that we have yet to understand? That's part of it. So just in the introduction, I just want to read this little quote from Rainer Maria Rilke, the German poet. Do you know him? He was quite a kind of a visionary, I think, and he basically says that, let me see if I can find it. He says, we must accept our reality, and this I felt was a great way of understanding it, where we're not freaked out, because if you see a being in front of you, even when I see it, it's like, what's going on? I mean, I didn't quite freak out, but I did sort of go unconscious. It can be traumatic. If you see something that's not supposed to be in your reality and you're not prepared for it, it's a shock, because I always say reality is more solid than the ground beneath your feet. And if suddenly something appears there that no one told us was supposed to be there, we don't know what to do with that. Or sometimes we don't even see it. Like in these lectures I usually do, I show this demonstration of these basketball players passing the ball to each other. So I say, okay, count the number of passes from this one team and not the other. And this guy in a gorilla suit walks through the court, and no one sees it because they're counting the balls that are being passed, and that's what they call misdirection. And I think that's what's happening in the news and everything. We are being told to look that way and not this way, and we're being taught to distrust our own mind. I just interviewed someone today who said, I had these childhood playmates, and everyone told me they weren't true, so I guess they weren't true. But we've been taught not to trust our mind. That's part of this culture, and now we're coming into a time of subjective reality where your experience is valid, whatever your experience is. No one can argue with that.
I think it has to be said, and I'm saying this in respect to the government's position,
Yeah.
as it is traditionally understood, that there's more to the story
Right.
than one player that appears in the neighborhood. We have, according to Desiree and my research as world investigators, more than 82 different species.
Right.
And so if the government is going to do, shall we say, abstract mathematics, how can you put forth a paradigm that covers all 82 categories unless you go into the realm of a new physics and new consciousness?
So that's always the question, like, why is it that the government isn't telling us? What do they have that they've been concerned about letting go of?
Right.
And I think the complexity of it, as we said, with multiple vehicles, it's not just one group that's coming to visit, that, shaking hands saying, put away your weapons of war and then we'll be friends. It's much more complex than that.
Right. I just want to read this paragraph by Rilke. I got a little sidetracked there. And then we'll get back to what could be really going on that they don't want us to know. Rilke says, we must accept our reality as vastly as we possibly can. Everything, even the unprecedented, must be possible within it. This is, in the end, the only courage that is required of us. The courage to face the strangest, most unusual, most inexplicable experiences that can meet us. Face them on an even playing field. These beings are not greater than us. They may be more intelligent, more civilized, more advanced, but they're not greater than the level of soul quality that we all are. That levels the playing field. So when you meet these beings, be yourself. No, don't be freaked out, Just take it all in, be the observer of reality. So, let's talk a little bit about what the government...
Also, I just want to go back to a little bit more idea behind what that person was talking about in his writing, and that is the fact that we don't feel consciousness is limited to the brain. Right. Consciousness, more like you can find by the work of Lynn Taggart, even Stuart Hameroff, who's a professor in Arizona, that it's a field. And I think what they're saying is really, and it might fly in the face of Alan's disagreement,
That's okay. You could.
Which is the fact that almost anything we can imagine, almost anything we can create, has its existence in that consciousness field, which means it may be able to manifest either to us in this reality or it manifests in another reality, because we're all sharing this consciousness field.
So to oversimplify, both the material aspect of life as well as the mental both come out of a higher consciousness. And the higher consciousness, as we see it, is part of the universal dynamic that allows different levels of evolution to connect.
And likewise, in terms of extraterrestrial beings, and we go beyond that, we'll talk about extracelestial and ultra-terrestrial. We mentioned these three in Alan's book in our chapter, but let's just talk about extraterrestrials for a minute. I mean, there are clearly beings, which I think is more shocking than anything, that look like us and exist on other planets. I mean, can you imagine? I mean, it's one thing if they grew up on Mars or something, they're little green men, because of their atmosphere, but how do you get our genetic codes to another planet? That's a whole nother seminar, but I do believe that is in
Well, they
reality.
say DNA is older than the Earth itself, so there's the panspermia idea, like we've been seeded from other advanced races, and that doesn't seem too hard to believe.
Anyway, and then there's also the elongated skulls that also
Right.
look like us. There's the tall whites that are taller than us, but still look like us.
They're luminescence, that's why they're called that.
And then I would say
They're
there's
not-
also luminous beings too,
Right,
which
there's
is another
luminous
reality.
beings.
And then there's the greys, and there's the reptilians, and there's the insectoids, and there's all these different types of intelligence
Right.
that have had encounters with people on this
Right,
planet.
it is a vast universe out there. This is really the simplest dimension, there's so much more, but we have the capacity of our minds to perceive it. This is really what we're all trying to advocate. There's more to us as human beings. And how do we know that? By dreams, by downloads, by psychic impressions, more and more people are writing to me, and I just talked to a Chinese ufologist. She says people all over China are having these visions of these beings. There's something happening. There's a veil that's being lifted here.
When I was in China back in the 1980s, I asked the head of Xinhua News, which was the official press for the Chinese Communist Party, how they could explain a etheric city that appeared over eastern China, long enough that film can be made of the city. I have a copy of the film. Actually, you see a city passing in the sky of a different dimensional relationship, and the Chinese editor said, we can't explain this. We have to go back to our Taoist ancestry. The communists cannot explain this.
But in actuality, of course, there is a lot that can't be explained, and there is what we would classify, and we've been spending time in Sedona, which is really quite far out, but is a great awakening taking place. And the Keys of Enoch talk about that. That's what's really starting in this century, is that people are, it's like the veils are getting thinner, or even lifting, and people are being drawn to certain, we'll say, places, and even people and families are just, and it doesn't have to be genetic families, it's spiritual families that are coming together. So we think this is all part of why ETs are also coming here. In fact, we actually say that there's, in the Keys of Enoch, a galactic house cleaning taking place in the local universe, and that's why more beings are kind of coming around this area.
Right, so we are trying to all raise our vibration, which will open up these doors of perception. And maybe we'll even end this discussion, not right now, but with a meditation that will take us all together in the field. We are actually creating a field, and the human race is a field, and this sector of the solar system is a field. So we're increasing these ecological zones and being affected by it. We are not isolated. We're not freaks of nature, which is what science has told us for the last 200 years. The indigenous people knew that we weren't. They knew we were connected. So we need more of that left-right brain cohesion instead of like, you know, functioning with just a logical, linear understanding of reality has gotten us into a big mess. It's gotten us great technology, but it's also created a hazard.
But we ourselves, we feel, with this great awakening are also growing. And one of the things Alan teaches, and we also have written a book about, is the power of remote viewing. Because when I said you're consciously connected to an extraterrestrial, we'll say species or whatever, once you see them, basically it's that consciousness linkage. Now, on this level, this was shown it to us by Stanford Research Institute in the 1970s, where like the remote viewers, and it can be anybody. In fact, they did pull people out of like the next offices, and they were amazing remote viewers. Everyone can do this, that they could see what was remotely viewed, like in Russia or somewhere else in South America. They could actually be there. It wasn't that they were, this is interesting for people, it wasn't that they were sending their information there, their minds there, and coming back. They were there. And it's part of that being present in the consciousness field. And it works with both space, which means you could be here and see something in Mexico, and it also works with time. So when Susan said people were picking up on us coming, it's because of the fact that precognitive energy also exists in that field.
So in addition to the evolution of extraterrestrial science over the last 70 years, behind the scenes there has been an evolution of consciousness science studies at the think tanks throughout the world, including SRI in this country and Novosibirsk in Russia on the other. I have the opportunity with Desiree to edit these declassified pictures. In our book, Mind Dynamics in Space and Time is the Real X-Files. We work with the top physicists, mathematicians in the American sphere of influence, as well as several of the astronauts who could actually create what is called mind reach, extend their mind into another dimension of information, retrieve information, come back without the use of physical technology. We believe that the consciousness / new psychology will help humanity bootstrap what is necessary to prepare for the extraterrestrial story on a large planetary scale.
Right, because our minds, like Desiree said, are not local. We think they're in our brains, but the brain is a receiver, like a radio. There's the announcer's not in the radio, it's being picked up by the signal. So our brains are tuned to our, let's say, soul frequency that we're picking up, and this is a sending and receiving unit, but we're non-local. We are everywhere. That's how psychics are so good. You know, if they get out of the way of the personality, they just tune in, right, Jackie? You just can tune into anything because all of us have non-local consciousness. We know everything there is to know about anything, anytime. This is the infinite sense of our being.
And I want to say also on a more personal level, change the way you're thinking to positive thoughts. Why is that important? Because you can pick up negative things all the time from the consciousness field, and your environment, you create that environment around you. So if you're, unhappy with your, significant other, or you're, think you don't have enough money, and then you get negative about it, you're not changing the field. The quantum physics tells us that every possibility is available in that field in the universe. And so by just shifting the energy or the tuning in that you're doing can change everything around you. And there's been several tests with this. People who had been unhappy in their workplace, all they do is change their field. They start being happy, saying, I'm going to be happy today. I don't care, if no one likes me, I'm going to be happy and I'm going to enjoy what I'm doing. And things just totally change. Even people who are negative left maybe the office, and new better people came in. So, we have a little bit control over this. I think that's important too, to realize that we're not little like nothings here.
And the field has just gotten bigger. I mean, they were always out there, these beings, but they are knocking at our door. They're saying, we're here. When you say, go away.
And they're just waiting for us to go, okay, what do you have to say today?
So when that field gets bigger, then there's so much more possibilities that we have yet to think of. Terence McKenna would say, the universe is not only stranger than you imagine, it's stranger than you can imagine. So really, it's like branching us out beyond our little box. All of us, we've been programmed to be in this little box, and there's so much. That's what the power of art, great art, takes us in and says, oh my God, there is more. Great music. And what were you going to say, JJ?
Yes, I was going to simply say, rather than speaking in platitudes, we must speak now in what's going to happen.
Okay.
And that's why in chapter 3 of your book,
which is our
I
chapter.
said something that was quite unique in the sense that I put the evidence on the table.
What was that? I don't remember. Tell us what it
42
was.
years ago in Mexico City at an international conference, I actually released the first pictures of the so-called extraterrestrial biological entities. Mm-hmm. And the press of Mexico, the equivalent of the New York Times, released this information. It was carried also in other presses throughout the world. But there was no reaction at that time. It was something like the Native American culture seeing the Spanish ships on the horizon. They were there, but we didn't recognize that event because our mindset would not recognize.
Although Mexico, the people are very open, and there seem to be a vast amount of sightings there. Our good friend Jaime Malzahn, who actually we encouraged to start doing his work there, he's really an amazing journalist on extraterrestrial subjects and paranormal. He has gathered some of the best evidence of extraterrestrials anywhere on the planet, and if they're all
evidence is one thing. To see the actual face of the extraterrestrial specimen is another. This is from a German publication, but it's also one that I gave to a German researcher.
Yeah, it's a photo.
Yeah.
And as that's being passed around, let me read to you from the book of my late colleague, astronaut Gordon
Cooper.
Take questions. Gordon Cooper was one of the first astronauts in space. He was decorated by President Kennedy. He writes, and I quote from his book, Leap of Faith, the first American president to answer a question at an official press conference about UFOs following a rash of public sightings, President Harry Truman said on April 4th, 1950, quote, I can assure you that flying saucers, given that they exist, are not constructed by any power on Earth, quote. End of quote. So this is very significant that Gordon Cooper, who was the first astronaut to pray in outer space, put the cards on the table before he passed away in this book. I want to read to you another paragraph in this book. He says, but as I see it, our government is now trapped in a big box of old lies. It's going to take a lot of courage on the part of some future administration to say, quote, folks, our government has been lying to you all these years. Now we're going to come clean and tell you about the real truth, end of quote. As I said, that's going to take a lot of courage, something that doesn't seem to exist in surplus in Washington these days.
So it actually goes back in terms of Gordy Cooper. We actually knew him and worked with him on a book we were consultants for Sidney Sheldon called Doomsday Conspiracy. But in 1951, he was flying he was Air Force, and he was flying across the borders, or with the border, paralleling the border of East and West Germany. And he said there were MiGs, the Russian MiGs, flying parallel to them, and they looked up, they could both see it, a flotilla, this is 51, a flotilla of UFOs. Now, Gordon at that time knew what the top Air Force craft were, and he said those were not ours. So he came back, he reported it, and what did they do? Put him in a straitjacket, take him off because they thought he was
They
nuts?
did?
No, they made him an astronaut.
Oh, they made him an
Which
astronaut.
only means, that was good, Alan, which only means that they already knew, and what he had seen, he hadn't overreacted, right? He was like very logical in reporting it, and so they knew that when he would go out in space, because we also knew Buzz Aldrin, briefly we worked in a company with him, and yes, they had lights. That was the first mission to the moon. They had lights the whole way, and when they got there, there was lights. And actually, a friend of ours went through the NASA archives because he was working for JPL at NASA, and he found those lights still in one of the pictures of when they were standing on the moon,
Right.
and we actually have copies
No,
of that.
so we're coming around like full cycle. So the government is almost there again. They were almost there in the 50s, and then the early 60s there was a rash of sightings, and in the mid 70s with Travis Walton, in the 80s Whitley Strieber, 90s who else? John Mack, and then it's like that book was written in 2000, right before Gordon Cooper died. So we're coming around this spiral, and we keep getting closer to the point of contact. I think this year is going to make a difference. There seems to be a people's movement afoot. I just met with Danny Sheehan at the MegaCon, and he is the lawyer for Luis Elizondo. You know who Luis Elizondo is? He's the one who's pushing the disclosure movement. He was inside the Pentagon. He said, hey, there's something going on here. Why don't people know about it? I don't know if he's a double agent or not. Some people say, well, you never really ever leave the Pentagon. But he seems to be pushing for some kind of movement in Congress to open up this case and tell the world. Why doesn't Russia or China come out with this? They obviously have craft too. There's a U.S. imperialism. I don't know what that's about, but they're waiting for this country perhaps to say, yes, we're not alone. So we are so close to this, because when that happens, the consciousness field, as Susan mentioned, takes a shift. The clutch goes down, we go into fourth gear, and we're in this new world that we can start to discuss with people and have a whole new history of the human race. Technology, cosmology, biology, all changes at that point.
So we were the first in space, so I wouldn't call it imperialism, but a cosmic, should we say, dynamic. Since we were the first to show our evidence, according to Gordy Cooper, in space.
Right.
We were the first to film the pyramids on Mars, which I released in 1973. I was the first anthropologist / astrophysicist to do this. We are in the leadership, and as a patriot, I would say there is more to the story than a simplistic story of another race that looks
Right.
like us. No, there are other races that do not look like us, and that is the psychology and the theology that is needed, and that is why my colleague, Professor Ted Peters at Berkeley, works with a group called astrotheology, theologians, both Protestant and Catholic, who are interested in the higher end of what is the ultimate significance in all of this, because contact doesn't mean much unless you have what I believe to be a sense of holism, that there is a divine source or creator,
Right.
and that we are just one of many experimental levels of this divine force.
But I think what Alan was saying earlier was also important, that don't think we're sub-race.
Right.
We don't even agree with Alan in the sense that we
What do you
feel
mean?
we feel we are an Adamic species, and we actually came from a higher
one that has self-realization as opposed
I
to one
agree.
that's unconscious.
a higher genetic code structure, and the flood actually was to get rid of the
Hybrids.
hybridization
I don't know
on this
about
planet
hybrids.
and coming back to the Adamic species. Because if you go back actually even to the Bible, it said that we were of light energy and we took on garments of skin because we chose to enter into a world of duality.
We were also Egyptologists, and you will see in one of our new books that we were doing the ground-penetrating radar in Egypt to find the tomb of Osiris. We also found artifacts that show hybridization experiments that the Egyptians were conducting where they could actually interbreed snakes and birds. And we found these samples. So this is the hideous side mentioned in the Old Testament and even in other ancient scriptural texts, that there are limits to what you can do when you avoid and go beyond. As we see now, what I believe, AI has to answer this question: do we simply robotize the human race? When you get to certain limits, there is intervention that takes place.
And I have to say also, Dan Burge, who lives in the Las Vegas area, we met him. He actually has looked at the Keys of Enoch, and he supposedly was a microbiologist who worked at Area 51. And he supposedly had contact with the alien species there. And the reason why they were there at Area 51 is they actually were going through a state of neuropathy. Some of you know what that word is.
ET was having it. So he was talking telepathically to this being, which is the language of the universe. 10 out of the 11 essays in this book talk about telepathy, which is accessing the field. It all comes back to the field.
But we're saying, so this being actually needed our help because we had a close enough genetic connection, hoping that some of our blood or genes or whatever could could help their species. Because also if they clone a lot, it seems that they can degrade their cells, and they need ours. So it's not only them helping us, which many people get the impression of on situations like abductions, but some of the situation, my friend Virgil Armstrong, who was a CIA operative in the past, wrote a book, They Need Us, We Don't Need Them. I mean, that was his take, and that was several years ago. But we need to be part together.
I mean, I don't agree with everything everyone says in this book or here at this table, but I don't disagree. But we just need to have a conversation. It can't be hidden anymore. Whatever's going on is a reality. There are facts. There are craft. There are beings locked away
Various
somewhere.
beings.
And there's each of us are also having experiences. This is what Grant Cameron says. Don't talk to the scientists. Talk to the contactees. Those are the ones that know the truth about this reality. So we have to acknowledge that, first of all, we're not limited to just our brains. Our consciousness is not limited just to this body. We are making contact all the time. And life is an emergent property of creation. It's out there. We are not freaks of nature. Like, imagine how strange that would be if we're just sort of like some
the
accident
only
of
ones,
and the accident of creation. I mean, there wouldn't be any of this other psychic community. There wouldn't be anything about the field. We'd just be very limited.
No, but we feel that we've actually been quarantined for a while,
Maybe.
which is a protection so that we ourselves can grow. Because if you go back to some of the ancient texts, you find that there were other beings that kept landing and giving people this information and that. I mean, going back to the Middle East, it talked, not only did they teach us the art of agriculture, but some of the beings taught us the art of warfare. So do you really want that as a civilization, or do you want to spend 6,000 years maybe just hanging out amongst ourselves for a while? Well, that time we feel is finished, and we're really moving into now. We better have evolved consciously. The Keys of Enoch also talk how 64 areas of science will be given to us to grow in terms of science. So we know astrophysically how we exist in the universe. We know historically previous civilizations. I mean, in San Diego, they recently found mammoth bones that were logically laid on top of each other. They go back to 130,000 years ago in San Diego. So
and this points to the understanding of a hereafter probability that they would take the bones and arrange them into a matrix. And so the end of the story is we're in an information synthesis age.
Right.
We're also in the age of Steven Spielberg. So young people throughout the world have grown up with the idea of the adventure in space, the fact that we're not alone. And now has come, should we say, the age of the Holy Spirit, or the giving of gifts in the higher psychic power, through which we can understand and identify with those cultures, those cosmic cultures that respect us, that we can work with, and avoid those that may be troublesome or use us as a guinea pig.
Right, but we also have to see what the media is telling us and how they're spinning the story and who wants to control the narrative. The government always likes to control the narrative and tell you what to think. and the media then takes what the government says and spins it to what they can fit into a box. And so we have to look beyond that. We have to look at who's telling us what. You know, even with what just went on the last year, there's so many different points of view, and everyone's right in their own reality, but it needs to be all laid out, and I feel we are at the threshold of a new time. If we can just, like, what was that line that Gordon Cooper said? If we just get a government to come forward and say, yes, we've been hiding the truth, and this is what it is. Will that ever happen? Probably not.
What did Philip Corso say?
What?
He
said,
it's a new reality if we can take it.
Yeah, so
we
the
can take
ETs are coming whether we like it or not. I think their sightings are happening in more and more frequencies, more and more people having communication. There have been, I talked to this woman who had direct contact, said there are races coming here. Ready or not, here we come, you know, so I think...
Well, not only coming here, they're already here, and we have specimens.
Right.
So, again, all due respect,
yeah.
there's a nice, smooth story that can be put out there by the press at some future event announcing the fact that we're not alone, but the reality is we have to make a psychological shift, a sociological shift, and a theological shift to accept the fact that we are but one of many in a larger cosmic family.
And that consciousness is really integral. What we are, how we think, what this vast scope of possibilities is all around. Whatever consciousness is, we have yet to even define it. That's what we are. We have to take that into account, and that's the even playing field we are going to meet these beings on. That one of exchange of consciousness, even if their frequencies are different. You know, that's what is so traumatizing sometimes. You're in the space of a being whose energy field doesn't really mesh with our energy field, so it can be a little jarring. But if you become the observer, like the quantum observer of the reality, you just take it all in without getting reactive, like an argument with your wife or something. Like you just take it all in and don't get affected, and then we meet them so we can start to expand into this bigger awareness. This is what they're waiting for us to grow up, I would say. So is there any questions, answers? Anyone have any experiences? Anybody have an experience you want to share? I always like to hear, like, Jackie, you want to tell us one of your experiences? She's a famous psychic. Jackie Salvati.
I'll just tell a quick one.
Yes, please.
I had, go back in years, kind of an overnight experience where I literally was told I was going to be a healer and do this and do that, and I had absolutely no intentions of ever being a healer.
What were you before?
I was in commercial real estate.
Oh, okay.
But I've always been spiritual. Anyway, I had a series of events that were so extreme, so amazing, that I absolutely could not.
What were those events?
Well, one of them I had of being in the backseat. I actually woke up and knew I had to go to a UFO conference. I had this...
Overnight, without...
Overnight, I was told to look up the Alpha Centauri. I had no idea what that was. Write a book about my life, blah, blah, blah. And I ran to my computer, and the cable was down, so I'd wait till 3 in the afternoon to look these things up. Anyway, I booked, there was something on my computer about a UFO conference in Laughlin. I booked it, called Chevron and said, I won't be in for 10 days. Mm-hmm. And so it was fascinating, and I knew I was coming. I literally was dancing around singing I'm coming out. I had no idea what was going on. I was drinking a glass of wine singing. Anyway, but it was so amazing to me, and on the way there, I leave home. I'm coming from California. And I look in this was,
That's okay, we're friendly.
Mirror. There's this being in the back seat, and I'm communicating telepathically, and he announced who he was, and I asked
Who was he? What was his?
His name was Rowan.
Okay.
He was 20,000 years old. I did ask how old he was.
Did you see proof? No.
Absolutely did not ask for a driver's license. and he told me that he was from Andromeda, and then he informed me that I was his daughter
Wow.
from
Oh, wow.
Andromeda, and that he was the titular head of the healing program
Wow.
that was occurring on Earth.
And you weren't into any of this stuff before.
Not this. I mean, I was very psychic and I was very spiritual.
Wow.
But no, not this. And we did have an event, my children and I, in the middle of the desert, in '76.
What
Wow.
happened?
A ship came and literally sat over the car, and you know, the typical radio, the lights and so on.
They all went out.
All went out. And
Wow.
and I went on a mission. I was convinced, we had a real estate company up in Utah. Every military guy that came in, I drug him into the conference room and said, have you ever seen a ship? Because I knew if I had, it had to happen.
And what did they say?
Absolutely, every one of them told me their experiences.
They had seen ships.
Every single one,
Wow.
which is very unusual at that time in the military.
Yeah.
Wow.
But again, it was, I knew if it happened to me, it had to happen to others. But that was in the 70s.
Right.
Yeah, that's
So what do you
we
make
came
of all this? What's your, understanding? What's happening? Because nobody knows.
Well, first of
Yeah,
all, and
that's-
I'll throw this out because it's one
Yeah.
thing that hasn't come up today. We are living a number of parallel lifetimes.
Right.
And what I have come to really understand is that there are times when I encounter someone who is actually a parallel of me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been a really interesting and exciting.
Right.
I had it happen with my son. We have this Fotar, who was kind of my guide with the healing and everything I do. And very big, incredibly funny.
Mm.
And a lot of young people recognized his name, which I thought was fascinating.
What's his name again?
Rowan. I'm
Rowan.
sorry,
Fotar.
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 Fotar is hysterical.
Okay.
So, and he's very big, and he would dress up and entertain clients. I mean, he was.
What do you mean? As an ET, he would come?
Oh, absolutely.
He would come to see clients?
He would go to my clients when I'm on the phone with them,
Oh, really?
or in their dream time. And it was, he
Wow.
always wore some funny outfit. And I was sitting with my son at breakfast one morning, and he was misbehaving badly. And I said something to him, and all of a sudden, my son was gone, and Fotar was sitting there, and he was huge in this little chair. And then he blinked out, my son was back, and I said, Ricky, you're Fotar. And he said, well, shit, I have to live. He was using drugs. And I said, yes, you do. You have a job.
No, it's true. Families do connect together. I mean, that's one of the things, and on other levels, and absolutely
Well, we have a
fantastic.
lot of experiences with
Yeah,
ships and so
yeah.
on. But it's,
Wow.
Yeah.
it's just a series of, I think this is why they wanted me to write a book, because there were a lot of funny things that happened.
Yeah.
Again,
Well-
it's exciting.
You're in a contact zone. In fact, at one of the local bases, the ET visitors come and they put on glasses and they come down to enjoy Las Vegas. That's how close they are to us.
I was in California,
Yeah.
but yes, this is a really high contact.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know we have only limited time, and so I want
Yeah.
to give the larger focus because we have been looking at the specific issues throughout the world, that there's a much larger issue of what you would call the homecoming, or what in biblical language is the gathering of the tribes, where humanity as a large is waking up.
Right.
And demythologize its myths to realize there's a higher science behind what has been handed down as religious or legend or sociological truths of ancestral contact. And so we are at a point now that we have to really shift some gears, because the cosmic others are going to be on our doorstep. So you will have to choose what group you want to go with, preferably those that are like ourselves, Adamics, or largely of the European tradition,
But
that
it's
are
more
working
energetically.
sensibly with the knowledge base of the human race,
Yeah.
as opposed to those who wish to experiment with us in
Right.
violation of our free will.
And also, we were saying, we're talking a lot about the government because this is really the time, really almost a week, that they're supposed to release
Right.
something. But really what's happening, and it's happening to people all over the world of all ages, is that they're contacting people directly, which is why Alan has his book, Making Contact, because we're all starting to make some sense of contact, and it can be, what we call, again, extraterrestrials, or it can be ultra-terrestrials. And we do talk about, well, we say eka bodies, that we all have different potentials in other realities. We have a book called Overself Awakening, because your overself is really your higher self, and then it manifests into these other realities, these other places where you need to live. Yeah.
But the choice is, I think, JJ, more energetically, who are you aligning with? What are you watching on television? How are you taking in the world? What are you sending out? This is like the choice. What level do you resonate with? If people don't
Absolutely.
feel comfortable, then maybe it's time to find new friends. Or maybe we all have found new friends.
And I'm
right
just saying
here.
this as a general observation.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're culturally addicted to those that would look like us, but there has to be something greater. There has to be what I call a heart math, an understanding
Right.
of the heart and the soul and the whole relationship of the next chapter of the human evolution.
So is there any more comments or questions? Let's say we'll do a meditation and we'll can look at some books.
We have films that will be released in the future. Desiree and I have cataloged, as I said before, more than 82 different categories. And even MUFON, the organization known as Mutual UFO Network, has recently come out with a book that catalogs some of this information.
It's called Extraterrestrial Species Almanac, and Dr. Hurtak mentioned it in connection with Arcturus, because the Keys of Enoch mentioned Arcturus as a shepherding mechanism for our universe.
So ideally, the government may mention things that will eventually be found on Mars. Even Israeli
That might be
scientists
how they
have confirmed
start.
what I said
Yeah,
in 1973, that there was once a previous civilization on Mars. We have it obliquely mentioned in the New Testament, where the Apostle Paul speaks to the wise philosophers on Mars Hill. The point of it is, those are all references to a much greater drama that we have taken for granted behind the biblical tradition.
A galactic drama that we're all a part of, that we have yet to been told, that we've been lied to about our history and who we are. And Linda Moulton Howe says in this book, we've been an enslaved race because we have not been told the truth. We've been treated like children, like, no, you're not grown up enough to know the truth. So it's time. So let's lay it all out, and that's what this book is in sequence, going from the external, the exo, to the esoteric, and discover more potential that lies in each one of us, that are of who we are.
We were being given a passport
Yes.
as to our next chapter of life, which is to be cosmic citizens. To recognize in this beautiful universe, the universe is teeming with life, and we are but one of many life forms graduating from Schoolhouse Mother Earth into the University of the Cosmos.
Right, so let's do a little meditation so we can all tap into that field together.
Really a visualization.
And kind of dropping in.
And we also use certain sacred expressions, like we can use the Om or the Shanti. Shanti means peace.
It's about, first I like to do is just feel yourself sitting on your chair. Feel your feet on the ground. You're sitting there. Put your attention on your feet. Feel yourself grounded there.
And begin to visualize before your mind's eye a spinning blue-green planet. At first it appears like a little sphere or marble, but then it grows and rotates, and all of a sudden you begin to see the whole solar system that we are connected with. And beyond this, you begin to see the threshold of billions of galaxies.
Right, so as you see that in your mind's eye, put your attention to the top of your head, the crown chakra. Feel the room lift. Now put your attention beyond the ceiling, out into space. Feel the vastness and those beings. Feel the presence of that vastness.
And let the Spirit guide you into the universe, but then also the multi-dimensional aspects of that universe. Whether we go through Alpha Centauri or even to another galaxy of Andromeda, we realize that that is only one of the myriad dimensions of life, that there are also light orbs, light beings in higher realms of intelligence that are also aligning with us when we align with them.
We begin to experience what the astronaut Mitchell called the overview effect, We see these spinning orbs, and as we go deeper and deeper into space, we see the blue-green planet known as Mother Earth left behind, as we see marvelous planets, spherical forms, even those that look like Saturn with its vast ring system. We see the vastness and the beauty, and we realize that we are part of this plenum, this ongoing continuum of life.
And as we head out into space, we see worlds upon worlds. We see the beings that inhabit those worlds that may not look like us, but they have a quality of love and openness, and they exist in different geometric shapes with different light languages emerging from their bodies. We're being greeted, being given messages as our minds expand to unknown languages, impressions of thoughts, new technologies, new visions of great horizons, new art forms, new messages of understanding, new communications. New ideas are being downloaded as we expand our universal mind.
And let us feel that higher peace. And let us say the expression, we're going to do this together. We'll start and we'll lead it. It's Om once, and then 3 Shantis, which means peace, and a closing Om. And we'll repeat that. So it ends up with Om, Shanti, 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 Om.
Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, 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 Om. Om, Shanti, Shanti, Shanti,
This
Om.
Om vibration connects what we know in the Hebrew Christian tradition as shalom, or peace.
So we feel the increased vibrational frequencies in our bodies. Let you take that in. Feel the acceleration on the cellular level as the biophotonic, as the light activations on the cells start to emanate light, emanate frequencies of love, and extending consciousness out into all directions. We fill the consciousness field with our peace of mind.
And we start to receive from the consciousness field a greater unconditional love, a greater peacefulness that we can always tap into when we align ourselves with higher consciousness, with divine consciousness, with universal consciousness. Higher and higher we go into the greater dimensions, and we see myriads and myriads of beings. Yes, they don't all look like us, but they all have a similar vibration of help, of service, of understanding, and of wisdom.
We feel the great love, and we feel also a vibration that connects our heart with our mind, with our spirit, and we begin to understand the triplet of energy. Even King David speaks of in Psalm 51, a new spirit, a willing spirit, a holy spirit. We begin to realize in the Sanskrit, the ancient Hebrew, Aramaic, there was once a universal language of music, and that music was used to modulate the 7 seals, the 7 chakras, and bringing humanity together. And so we begin to feel this excitement that the cosmic intelligence of light, pure light essence is guiding us with our divine spark.
Feel the vibration of the field of all of us just here in this room. Feel our oneness, our connection, our field that is joined together in union. And let's extend that out to the cities around us, and to the country around us, and to the planet, and to the neighboring solar systems and the beings that are there. We are joined in the consciousness field of divine oneness, the universe of sound and light. We expand out and out and out until we expand into all of creation is contained within the fractal of our beings.
And so also we can sing the expression, and we'll let my husband start it first, of the Om and then Ein Sof. The Ein Sof Ein is no, and Sof is limit. And feel ourselves having no separation. In terms of remote viewing, it's non-local awareness. We are aware of all things. There is no limitations to our own possibility. So whether you believe God is in the heavens, you have to also realize
The
that
divine is within our hearts. And the three oldest traditions, the Sanskrit, the Hebrew, and the Aramaic, come together in this mantram of vibration to raise our consciousness, to see the ecumenical embrace of light, and to recognize the Supreme One who speaks to all of the great prophets, mystics.
And these ancient languages are the encoding of vibration. They're the original forms of communication. So as you hear these words, they take us back to the beginning of time.
Om Ein Sof. Listen carefully. Om Ein Sof. 4 times. Om Ein Sof. Om Ein Sof. Om Ein Sof. Om Ein Sof. And as multitudes of beings of light gather, we distinguish the levels as we go from the extraterrestrial to the extra-celestial, and ultimately to beings of pure light we call the angelic, those of the avatars, those called by modern science the ultra-terrestrial. And they are beings of light, and we greet them with a special blessing found in the ancient Hebrew Aramaic, the one that I used and I've taught even to astronauts. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzabaoth. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God of hosts. And we sing it, we chant it, we vocalize it. And if we cannot sing, we just think about this expression. I'm going to lead you 12 times for those who want to participate. Keep this in mind, for this is one of the great salutations that distinguish.
These sounds recalibrate the frequencies of our cellular structure back to its original vibration.
Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzabaoth. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzabaoth. Together. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzabaoth. 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 Kadosh, 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 Adonai. I'm going to vocalize it as it should be used. Those who have musical strength. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzabaoth. With that strength, with that power, comes a certain vibration of the heart, mind, and spirit coming together as a triple power, opening all of the 7 chakras or the 7 seals to make a resonance, to make a contact, to make an exchange of mind to mind with those who are indeed the true angelic ones, the true cosmic teachers of the life that continues.
So just let your body feel the vibration, feel the new essence, feel a new energy arising of possibility, of potential, of expansion. Bring in the higher forms of consciousness as you open your awareness to something new, something unknown, and let it just vibrate through your body and sit in that place for 1 second as we drop into that place of peace. 1 minute. Empty.
Take a deep breath.
Take a breath in. Take this expanded consciousness back here to the room as we come back and feel the greater presence that's been around us. It's
The
here.
divine spark that dances in your heart. May we be blessed,
Thank you.
and may we be joyous as we prepare for the next chapter of humanity connected with the higher evolution.
It's coming. The next chapter is right here. Thank you so much for listening, being with us today, and sharing this. And oh, you doing commercial?
Yes, yeah. Don't forget to. This book is fabulous because,
Oh.
like I said, it has everything from consciousness realities to really the nuts and bolts as well.
Yeah, and it's an easy book to read because it's written in a language that it's about our evolution. So it's from the outer to the inner, from the upper to lower.
Remember,
So-
Gordy Cooper, your great patriot, had this experience from upstairs.
Yeah, we're
of
waking
contact, and he celebrated with Desiree and I. And the mantras that I taught you is an ancient Hebrew blessing that if you get any difficulty, use it. It does
Right.
work.
And we want to thank Susan at
Definitely
Mystic
Susan
Bookstore.
Morgan.
So, and if you're in
We
the
are
Henderson area, please
Mystic
come
Dreamers
by.
right here. Yeah.